Hello everyone. Today we'll be going over the concept of demand associated with both micro and macroeconomics and applies to your daily life as well. Because whenever you're trying to buy something off of Amazon or trying to get something out of the grocery store, you're always placing a demand for a certain good, and your individual demand is what allows a certain market to run, and you play a lot of power in that. So let's go over what demand is, the determinants of demand, shifts in demand, and associate it with the graph of demand and the demand curve. So to define demand, before I do that, I thought I'd go over the etymology of demand, the origin of where the word comes from. So demand comes from the Latin origin of words which means formally, and mandre, to order. And together you get demandre, to formally order, and that has come from Latin to French and to English. As a economics definition, demand is when anyone, a consumer, individual, business, literally anybody, whoever is willing and able to purchase a good or service, such as your Amazon services or any business-to-business, business-to-consumer service, they're able to purchase this good or service at different prices over a certain period of time, given ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus in economics means as all conditions hold, meaning everything else stays the same, essentially. We don't assume or make any assumptions, we just assume everything stays the same when we say ceteris paribus in economics. So, that defines demand, and according to the law of demand, which I'll go over really quickly, it states that there is always a negative relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded over time. Just think about it. You wanting to buy, let's say, 10 pens for $1 each at a certain time, and you wanting to buy those same 10 pens for $5 each after 6 months, your demand would have changed. You wouldn't be willing to buy those 10 pens for $5 each because you knew back 6 months ago those pens were $1 each. And that displays that there is a negative relationship between the price and quantity demanded of a good over a particular time. So as price falls, quantity demanded increases. As price rises, the quantity demanded for a good decreases. And that would be the law of demand. So always remember, there is a negative relation between price and quantity demanded of a good. That's essentially the law of demand. Okay, now we will go over the graph, the determinants, and the shifts that occur when associating the demand curve with its graph. So, what are the determinants of demand? Exactly. So, they are number of buyers in the given market, tastes and preferences of consumers, the income of a consumer with respect to an inferior good, income of a consumer with respect to a normal good, the price of a substitute in consumption, and a price of a complement in consumption. I will go over all of these very in the moment, so pay attention. First, with the demand graph, we have here, as we said, the law of demand states that there is a negative relationship between price of a good and quantity of a good, and we can see that in the graph because demand has a negative slope when comparing price versus quantity. We have D1 here, and I've also marked different points on the graph to explain how price affects demand. Price will only affect along a single demand curve, meaning price can cause demand to shift down or shift up along the same curve, meaning it can go to this point over here, we'll call this B, or it could go to this point over here, A, or it could go all the way down to this point over here, C, which is highlighted in red as a dot. So, as a result of price, meaning if price increases, then we would go to A, but if price decreases a bit, we could either go to B or C. We would only move along the demand curve D1. We're not going to shift up or below. We will only stay on that demand curve. So price does not mean shift. This is very important. A lot of people can tend to get confused and think price causes a shift in demand, but no, that is not the case. Price does not cause a shift in demand. You only shift along your current demand curve. Moving on. So, to describe all the determinants we know of with respect to demand, we have number of buyers, taste and preferences. These are usually important because number of buyers determines how big your market is. Taste and preferences determines whether your customers like your product or not. So if you have more buyers, you're going to have a shift in demand, which will be outward, like so, going from D1 to D2. If not, you will go down and go to D3. You'll shift inward. So number of buyers matters because that makes sure how big the market is. Taste and preferences, it also works in the same way. If your consumers like your good better, more demand. If not, less demand. It will be a shift. And inferior goods and normal goods. To explain that, inferior goods are the goods that we generate less demand for as our incomes increase. For example, a McDonald's Happy Meal. You wouldn't be eating a McDonald's Happy Meal if you're earning a six-figure salary per year. That would be considered an inferior good. So your demand for McDonald's Happy Meals is going to shift inward from D1 to D3. That is essentially how inferior goods work. And if it were the vice versa, if your income decreased, your demand for McDonald's Happy Meals would increase from D1 to D2. Normal good, on the other hand, is any good which you will demand more of if your income increases and demand less of if your income decreases. Essentially, for example, you're earning a six-figure salary, you're going to demand more of luxury restaurant meals. So you're going to shift your demand from D1 to D2 versus D1 to D3. If your income decreases, you're not going to want as many luxury meals at a restaurant. You shift your demand from D1 to D3. Price of substitutes and price of complements, on the other hand. A substitute in consumption would mean an alternative you would have. Let's say we have this graph for the demand for pens. So a good alternative or substitute for pens would be pencil as a writing utensil. So what would occur as we consider substitutes in consumption, if the price of a pencil goes down, that means our demand for pens is going to go down. Why? We're going to want more of pencils instead because pencils are a good substitute for pens. And since pens would be more expensive than pencils, our demand would shift for pens and we would go from D1 to D3. So if a substitute in consumption's price decreases, our demand for the said good we are considering, which is in this case pens versus pencils, your demand for pens would decrease, and it would be the vice versa if the price of pencils increased. If the price of pencils increase, your demand for pens is going to increase. It will go from D1 to D2. On the other hand, complements in consumption. Complements in consumption are goods that go well together. Phones and phone cases, for example. Tennis balls and tennis rackets. these are complements. They complement each other. So let's say, again, pens and paper, they're complements. If the price of paper, in this case, which is a complement, increases, your demand for pens is going to decrease, because you won't really want more expensive paper, and you won't, if you don't have paper, you're not going to want more pens. So your demand would go from D1 to D3. Your demand's going to decrease if the price of paper increases. And on the other hand, if the price of paper were to decrease, then your demand for pens is going to increase. You're going to be willing to buy more paper, which you will have to have more pens as a result. And that's how substitutes and complements would work in this case. And that is how demand shifts, and how price impacts demand, and the determinants of demand cause shifts in demand with respect to its graph. And that's all for today, folks. I really hope you enjoyed this video on demand. Please give me feedback on what I can do to improve these videos, and please leave your questions if you have any. I really hope this helped. Thank you so much.